Hello, Bob Kelly here. Thank you for joining me, or sort of joining me. I'm sort of joining you. Um, I really did want to be at the event in person, but due to circumstances outside my control, I'm coming to you like this. I still intend to try to make the most of it. I have recorded this so I can do a little better job and avoid the inevitable technical difficulties. But I will be on live for Q&A at the second part of this session, and I will also be at the booth to meet and talk with you there. So I really do want to try to make the most out of my sort of being there. The best thing about the AppManagEvent that I've enjoyed year after year is being able to discuss these topics directly with you. And when it comes to these topics, I'll segue into my actual presentation here and say that I couldn't decide what topic. So I ultimately decided to come up with the top 10, and I will go through 10 different topics that I think should be of interest to you, or will hopefully be of interest for you, and hopefully you walk away with something that makes you very happy that you came to this almost session. I do a lot of video recorded presentations, but usually not with my face, so I hope you appreciate I'm going above and beyond to try to give you something special here today. And you get to look at me the whole time. Isn't that great? So let me start by giving away everything I'm about to talk about. Maybe not the smartest thing, but I want you to see the agenda to pick on some of these topics that you will hopefully be interested in hearing about. I think maybe 2/3 you'll be happy to hear about, and maybe I can make you happy about the other third. I'll start by talking about the importance of packaging today. I will discuss MSIX and why it may or may not be time for you to start looking at that a lot more seriously. I'll talk about packaging and Windows 11. What does Windows 11 mean for packaging? The SaaS takeover. We've been hearing a long time that applications are all going to go to the cloud and you're not going to need to repackage or do any of the things you've been doing. And we've been hearing that for a long time. So we'll talk about how things are coming in that department. We'll talk about patch catalogs, which is something that you might have heard me talk more and more about lately. This isn't going to be a product pitch, but I have been thinking about it a lot as something that I deliver on the product side. And that also segues into number 6 here, vulnerability management. In addition to Admin Studio, I am also product manager for Flexera's software vulnerability management solution. And it is it puts me in a position where I'm talking quite frequently about patch prioritization, deciding which patches need to be addressed first and how to go about that. So I think I've got some good information to share on that front. And then, of course, I'm going to talk about endpoint management and repackaging because those are my favorite topics, and there's no way I could do an a la carte session without dedicating some time to those. And then the last one, /2, I was going to have this be one on scripting and wrapping together, but decided they were big enough topics that I should break them up. And of course, it's better when you have a top 10 list. I don't think you'd settle for a top 9. So I'm going to give you what you need. All right, so I figured I'd start the list off with something good, tell you what you want to hear. The importance of packaging today. You're a packager. Maybe not everybody here is a packager. This used to be the packaging event, and I could say that with more confidence, but certainly everybody has a good awareness or hand in packaging. I'll make that assumption. It's a good skill to have these days. The preparing and the deployment of new and updated software is more important than ever. It used to be all about Windows migrations, maybe not 100%. Of course, there's new application requirements, new networks being stood up, but the most common scenario that we'd hear about when it came to packaging activities was migrating to Windows from another operating system, migrating from an older version of Windows to a new one. This is the opportunity to get our house in order and get everything up to date. These days, it's much more about security updates, right? So there's security updates coming all the time, and that means we need new versions of applications deployed. And who does that? But the good old packaging team. There's version sprawl, which is a term that I've heard coming up more. And this is the problem of just having too many versions of an application in your environment. Not necessarily just on endpoints and servers, but a mix of the two. The more different versions of applications you have, that's not only increases the likelihood that you have a vulnerable version or an outdated version that you shouldn't have installed, but it is going to impact the ability to support that application, because your support team has to ask, well, which of the 9 versions in our environment do you have? You want them all up to date, but that doesn't come for free, and it's the packaging team that people look to for helping them address it. Outdated software, very similar. Maybe they're all in the same version. It isn't that great, but it's 8 versions old. And end of life. So end of life, end of support software, just plain old outdated software, isn't something anybody wants to have in their environment. And so these are all regular tasks that the packaging team is called in to help support. And then portfolio rationalization, I think, is another thing that it's not new. I think I'd put it between then and now. I think a lot of portfolio rationalization projects have been executed, hopefully, but maybe it's an ongoing thing that you come back to. When you just have too many applications out there doing the same damn thing, and now you've got to create new versions to deploy updates. A security update comes up, now you got to patch 5 different versions of the same application, or what could be the same application, but you have 5 different applications all doing the same thing, which gives you 5 times the work. So getting the need to package down is a big part of how you keep it under control. And so very important. We did a survey at Flexera not too long ago asking people from an asset management perspective, what is your greatest concern in managing assets? And people said the vulnerabilities first, not too surprising. Version sprawl, just talked about that. Again, not too surprising. And then lifecycle management, end of support, end of life software. You could argue that end of life is vulnerable, so that's a duplicate entry there. But the key thing I want to highlight here is the top 3 concerns when it comes to managing assets are all addressed by packaging. So obviously packaging is a very important skill set and a very important role that's being played by you in your environment. The importance of packaging: security, end users, me, you got everybody asking you for packages, and then you got to do the packaging, right? And I always say packaging, a lot of times I'll start, and I guess I'll take this opportunity to point out that packaging and repackaging are not the same thing. Packaging is just preparing an application for deployment. That could be wrapping it, that could be converting it to a format that you've chosen to handle your applications with, like AppV or virtualization technology. And it could be repackaging, but it isn't necessarily any one of these things. It's just getting an application, the newest version, getting it prepared in such a way that it's going to install the way your security team, your end users, and you want them deployed and available to your end users throughout your environment. And that can mean different things for different applications. MSIX. Why not? So MSIX. I feel like I've been talking about MSIX for a couple of years because I have been. There's some good and bad things about MSIX. So AppAttach. I think a lot of people, particularly from an enterprise point of view, are pretty happy about the promise of AppAttach. If you're managing an Azure virtual desktop environment, you can just attach an application from the outside and it's instantly available. It's not being advertised or streamed. The files are just there. You're mounting those changes to the file system directly. And that has the ability of making it immediately available, which is really, really good when you're looking at persistent VDI environments. But then it also means a new paradigm when it comes to updating software and just having new and updated software be made available. Windows 11, It is not required for Windows 11, but it is the preferred setup format for Windows 11. When it is installed with MSIX, the application will run in its own memory space and have some other benefits that aren't super exciting. I know I was really hopeful that the Windows Store would require MSIX, but they went way in the other direction and said you can put any setup that supports silent installation into the Windows Store. So that's good for the Windows Store. That means we're going to get a lot more applications in there, and maybe that can ultimately make applications easier to manage and update. So in the long run, it's a good thing. But you know, from an MSIX proponent position where I wanted to see MSIX succeed and succeed faster, I recall when we had Windows Installer as a requirement for Windows logo. It was a Windows logo requirement. So in order to get that made for Windows stamp on your software box, not that we have those anymore, you had to have it in MSIX format, or MSI format at the time. There is no MSIX requirement. They're using the carrot instead of the stick. So there are benefits to MSIX that everyone hopes will make their way to the mainstream without being forced there. The capabilities are maturing. There are things like the ability to poke outside a virtual container or get into another virtual container from one application so they can talk to one another. There are a number of different improvements that we've seen coming that are definitely good for MSIX. From a supportability standpoint, handling updates and even deployments. When you install an application, the files get laid down right alongside the ones that are live. So if the application's up and running, you don't have to prompt the user to shut down the application or reboot the computer because something was in use. You can just install it, and then the next time the application releases the file and launches again, it will just be there automatically. And updates extend that to almost an advertised location from a Windows installer standpoint. The package knows where the source files came from, and through policies you can say that you want to automatically update it. So it's almost like a universal application update feature that you can control versus every application that you get, the first thing you do is figure out, is this thing going to try to update itself? Let me turn that off. And in this case, you'll get some consistent control over that, which I think could be a really big benefit. On the downside, containerization is a blessing and a curse. It's going to mean that applications install without making a mess of your system. You're not going to have any conflicts. Isn't that great? But because it's running in a virtual container and not really installed, we do run into problems with trying to reference the local directory files and things like this. To fix that, we have the package support framework, but using that can be challenging. It definitely adds complexity to MSIX from a packaging standpoint. And Microsoft hasn't been super quick to address packaging challenges. There are things being done recently that I think are really encouraging, but one could argue if we were going to get here sooner, we would have had to address these things sooner. I think it is getting to the point where it is pretty mature, but up until pretty recently, there were enough roadblocks that people were looking at MSIX as a future technology they wanted to be aware of, but not something they really needed to get their hands dirty with. And then finally, Microsoft themselves haven't been super quick to adopt MSIX. I would have loved to see everything start coming out as an MSIX package from Microsoft a long time ago. But the good news is we are starting to see the first signs of that, and certainly hearing that there's more to come. So let's look at the timeline of things. Put my Nostradamus hat on. I wanted to make some predictions, but very recently, like in the last several days, some things have happened that make these predictions pretty safe. But I swear I had them before, and I'm sure I could point to some older material that would convince you of that. But here we go. So MSIX was announced. Obviously, that's the beginning of the timeline. This actually happened quite a while ago, and then nothing happened for a long time. So the next big milestone that would really drive it forward and not just be an interesting topic for us to all converse about is for Microsoft to adopt it. If Microsoft started releasing MSIX, then we as IT pros would get our hands on MSIX. ISVs themselves would also see the benefits of MSIX because they'd be using it. But it actually was quite a while before we saw any MSIX packages in the wild that you would actually use. OneDrive popped up in the Windows Store in June of 2021, and then just last month in October 2021, we saw sysinternal's new setup package come as MSIX. So that very good news. This is how it happens. We are also expecting Office to come maybe next year. That's obviously a very big one. The goal of the Microsoft team is that people, unlike yourselves, would not be even aware that it was an MSIX package. It should be seamless and not a big deal. It's a big deal to us, but obviously the goal with something like a setup and deployment technology is for it to be very under the covers and behind the scenes. So next big milestone that I've been looking for is small ISV adoption, where we'd start to see some small tools that we may use in the enterprise pop up as MSIX packages, either optionally or as required. And that would be a nice step, again, in the direction of mainstream adoption. And then, of course, enterprise adoption. We want to see not just ISVs, but we start hearing that most customers we talk to, or most packaging warehouses and so forth, are all pumping out MSIX, and that's the preferred format. If you talk to Microsoft about the future of installers, or you go to their session here at the event, what is the future of setup deployment technology? It is MSIX. Very adamant about that, which is great to hear. And then finally, large ISV adoption, where we start seeing major products that we all care about and support available as MSIX. So this is kind of the landscape, the whole timeline, as it were, and we've gotten through the first part rather slowly. It'd be frustrating to put months or years or quarters on this, but we are getting to a good point now. We are seeing Microsoft adopt it. We are seeing ISVs start to adopt it. Just about a week ago, in early November, we saw the Mozilla Firefox setup released as an MSIX package. I talked to some people who say it's not the best MSIX package, but we are seeing it happen, and we'll all learn, including the ISVs, and get better. But it is the first time that you'll probably want to get your hands on it and play with it, and now you've got yourself a real-world scenario to get familiar with MSIX in your enterprise without necessarily repackaging and creating your own, just to see what it's like. Windows 11 packaging. So what does it mean for packaging? What does it mean for Windows support? Not a lot. It really does seem to just be another build of Windows 10 that is backed up. If you do a ver at the command line, or you look at the About window, it is Windows 10 under the covers. So maybe it's more of a marketing release, but there are some cool things about it. App compatibility, definitely less and less a factor. Admin Studio is known for its application compatibility capabilities, and we've moved more towards recommending it be used reactively versus proactively, because when you run into a problem, those kind of reports and insights and fixes are very valuable, but most of the time these days you don't have a compatibility issue to address. So it actually makes more sense not to spend the time proactively addressing those things, but reactively, looking into those reports and fixes when you need to. So you don't need to repackage. You're not going to be rolling out a new gold image of your Windows 11 environment, re-imaging all your machines. Maybe you will. You can. It's far less common. Microsoft's been pushing that Microsoft Windows be updated more like an application, more like a big service pack. Not like a new operating system, but really just service pack, service pack, service pack. And that was really driven home by Windows 10, and it's just every 6 months a new build. It did feel like an update. We kind of got used to that more update scenario versus a wipe and replace. But maybe you'll decide that this is a wipe and replace opportunity, that things have gotten to be a mess again. You want to get your hands around it. And you may use Windows 11 as an opportunity for change. So any OS update can be a catalyst for change. It's new, even if it is just a marketing release and not groundbreaking to how you manage Windows or how you manage the applications on Windows. It can still be an opportunity for you to rethink your process, the tools, the way you use them, address technical debt. You know you've got a bunch of applications that are out of control and need updating. Now's your chance to maybe take advantage of that as part of a Windows 11 project. And consider leveraging MSIX for some applications or most applications. This really could be the time to do that. The SaaS Takeover, the much anticipated death of desktop applications. Come on, we've been hearing this for so long. It's not going to happen anytime soon. I don't think I'm saying anything controversial when I make that point. But I will admit that the shift has begun. It will slowly continue, and it will take a very, very long time. So some applications are simply better suited for the cloud and for a subscription type delivery. But even subscription type deliveries aren't necessarily inexplicably tied to SaaS. You can have client applications that are subscription as well. We see that with Adobe. We recently moved to such with Admin Studio even. So popular applications are leaning towards SaaS. Office is still largely a desktop app. I think it's the best example of a web application because you can be in Word, to a lesser degree PowerPoint. Outlook is pretty impressive if you've used it. I mean, the context menus are there, the drag and drop is there, the look and feel. You can forget that you're in a browser until you go to use a certain function and don't see what you expect. So that really says a lot for how far SaaS is coming. But it also is, you'd be hard pressed to find somebody who doesn't prefer the desktop application. I'm constantly saying open in desktop app, open in desktop app. It's a preference thing, and it really is coming a long way. So I would say that in-house applications are probably the first to go because they're falling out of support, and these in-house applications need new versions, and why continue to build on-prem fat app client application when you could have it be served through the web. And there's so many things that you can do through the browser now that it really isn't a technology limitation. It's more a matter of appetite. Patch catalogs. The end of traditional packaging? No, of course not. Are they too good to be true? Maybe. Depends on what your expectations are, right? So on the good side, we've got the ability to quickly handle the latest versions of applications. A new version comes out, you can be aware of it right away. You've got a silent command line that's ready to go. You've got the detection logic that's ready to go. It allows you to react to the need to handle those applications much faster. It can save you time. You don't have to go digging through IT Ninja or Googling around trying to find out what's the command line for this one or that one. And when it's not Windows Installer and something obvious, then it can become a challenge to find out what's the best way to go about silent installation, and particularly to be able to customize it to any degree. Most of the time, you install over the top of an existing version to update it. So with that in mind, a new version of Chrome comes out with a security fix. You can use this patch catalog information to update that existing version. You don't necessarily have to remove it and customize it. Really, that customization is typically a challenge when initially launched or when initially rolled out. And then in the future, when you're updating it to a newer and newer version, typically those things stick around. It does depend application to application, but for the most part, that's a big benefit. On the bad side, it's not all roses, so customization can be limited to non-existent, depends on the source of your patch catalog and the application in question. the installation behavior may be inconsistent. Sometimes you install the latest version and now it's unlicensed, or it's you had the community edition installed and now it's the enterprise edition or the home edition. Your editions get screwed up, and these are things that can happen with certain applications that you find out the hard way, and then hopefully we're all going and holding those ISVs accountable for getting the application right so that we can have the expected behavior when we do an install over the top type scenario. And then just incomplete application coverage. So when it comes to a patch catalog, it's great, the things that it covers, but there are a lot of things that it can't cover, and that is really the biggest problem with the patch catalog as the ultimate solution for the problem of packaging. Patch catalogs, it really comes down to what are your realistic expectations. There are free SCUP catalogs out there, like Adobe has one, and there's some SCUP catalogs out there for drivers and applications that are more hardware centric. And then there's some paid catalogs out there. There's a few vendors here offering a patch catalog, including my own. And then there are all the applications that are unaddressed. So even the largest catalog, if we say 4,000 installers are handled by this catalog, that's a lot of installers. It's still not going to be everything you need. So getting to that other part, we go back to my first topic of the importance of packaging. It's important to package. You're still going to have to handle a significant number of the applications. So if your expectations are that you can do more with the resources you currently have and get some automation in place, yes, excellent. If the expectation is every application's covered and I don't have to do any work anymore, so I don't need to do any packaging, and my whole packaging team can be reassigned to other activities, wrong expectations. I'm not going to be happy with that outcome. Patch catalog candidate. So I said everything can't be in a patch catalog. You've got your, let's see, I'm going to be backwards when I do this. So you got your catalog provided applications. So over here you got your applications where the setup is publicly available. There's a silent installation support available to you, and it can be scripted for customization. So that's the perfect example, and those are the things that you find typically in a patch catalog. When you don't have all of these things, they're not in your traditional patch catalog. Admin Studios is not traditional. But if you're going to package it yourself, you're going to have to do that for any application that's gated. If that setup is not publicly available, then no catalog is going to be able to reliably know there's a new version, download it, test it, and take it through its paces and make it available to a catalog. So you may get the silent installation details or the customization help potentially, but you're going to have to go get that setup file yourself, and that kind of breaks the automation benefit, unfortunately. Some applications just don't have silent installation support, as you well know, and those essentially need to be repackaged, and you've got your repackaging skills you can dust off to take care of that. And then when there's complex customization needs, so the application needs to be customized, you can figure out what needs to change in order to implement those customizations, or you could snapshot it, get it in your repackage. So help for about 35% of your applications, maybe great help to get you a lot of the way there, but still you're going to have to handle about 65% of the applications yourself. And this is very, very broad numbers, of course, but generally speaking, I think this will resonate with a lot of people that have taken a close look at what kind of coverage they can get. And like I said, automation is really the key. This is where the patch catalog data, I think, really gets valuable, because what you want to do is not, it's only so valuable that you don't have to go research the installation command and you have what you believe to be a reliable silent command line details for a vendor setup. There is certainly value in that, but it's more valuable that you're being notified that there's a new version right away. So, maybe there's a security implication, maybe there's not, maybe you care, maybe you don't, but new version, okay, I'm aware of it, and I have the download, I have the command line, I have the detection criteria, and that means that I can automate getting that application out to at least pilot systems, if not a ringed deployment where it really gets all the way out to production. So automate what you can, and then hone your process of handling what you cannot. So if you have to provide the setup file yourself, make that part of your process and leverage what you might be able to get out of the catalog for the rest. And then your in-house applications, your applications that simply have to be repackaged, that's just your repackaging process. And like I said, it's not going away. Vulnerability management. So trying to patch it all. This is what I talk about quite a bit. So industry reports show that only 1 in 10 patches get deployed. That's 1 in 10 patches. So about 10%, which really seems pretty unsatisfactory. You could certainly handle 10 packages, but you got to think about it at scale, right? So I know from past sessions where I've said raise your hand if you have this many applications, this many applications. There's people in the room with over 500 applications, over 1,000 applications, over 2,500 applications, over 5,000 applications. And in some environments where you're not managing the desktop that strongly and users can install what they like, the number of applications just goes through the roof. And being able to stay on top of that is pretty daunting. And so 10% of all that would be impressive, and this is what we generally see. But if you prioritize the patches, the security updates that you roll out, and roll out the right 10%, then you can effectively mitigate your security risk. So asset sensitivity is one key aspect of this Venn diagram, where if the system is your CEO's laptop, or your finance VP's laptop, and they're traveling to a hostile country, then that computer, you really want to make sure everything's secure. You don't have any known vulnerabilities on there. A server that is not connected to the internet, locked up in a safe room, doesn't touch anything, and you have to do a retina scan to go into the room, maybe you don't have to worry about a vulnerability with of a man-in-the-middle attack that's fundamentally impossible due to physical security. So you have to consider the sensitivity of the asset itself. The application you're patching, how prevalent is it? I know a lot of environments that I go into tell me that that's basically what they do. If Google has an update, then they're going to deploy Google Chrome's update because that's on every computer in the environment. And so that amount of work is addressing the maximum number of endpoints or benefiting the maximum number of users. Sure, that is a component. Certainly not what you should base your prioritization on exclusively, but it certainly can be a component. The most common one, I would say, historically is the CVSS criticality score. This is a 1 to 10 score that indicates the criticality of the vulnerability. If it were to be exploited, how bad would it be? Can they remotely get to all the files on your endpoints and pull them off without the user having to do anything? Then yeah, that's a pretty critical vulnerability, and you want to definitely make sure you get rid of that one right away. And then, because you hear about the huge number of vulnerabilities, many of them really don't warrant your attention. Of course, you want everything updated. Certainly, if there's any security impact, you want it updated. But realistically, if you accept that you can't patch everything and 10% is really more realistic, then you only want to spend your time on those that have the most critical impact to your security. You probably heard the term by now, threat intel or threat intelligence. Vulnerability intelligence is the what-if scenario, that CVSS score, and research of the vulnerability and what could happen. Threat intelligence is more around the actual situation for that vulnerability in the wild. Are the bad guys doing something with that vulnerability? You can have a whole environment riddled with critical vulnerabilities and never get attacked. Until a bad guy writes a virus or a Trojan horse or some malware to take advantage of these vulnerabilities that you have in your environment, you're continuing to live on borrowed time. Like, it could happen tomorrow, but threat intelligence is all about that likelihood of exploitation. What is being exploited right now? That you really want to do something about. If there's a critical and it's actively being exploited in the wild, you shouldn't be in this session right now. you gotta go patch that right away. And then in the same notion, you could have something that is not on a sensitive system, isn't on that many endpoints, doesn't have that high of a criticality, but is actively being exploited right now in your area even. So you can take advantage of that to really get to that right 10%. In fact, of the number of vulnerabilities disclosed each year, only 6 to 8% of those vulnerabilities actually end up getting exploited, and therefore potentially causing you real damage if you're subject to that attack. So 6 to 8%, 10% of your applications, it's not a bad place to be, and it's reasonable. So with the right data, you can patch the right things, focus on the right places, and mitigate your security risk effectively. Very quick plug, go talk to Yaron about Software Vulnerability Manager at our booth. It has leading security advisory data. Our vulnerability and threat intelligence are unmatched. The team that supports that used to run a product you knew as Secunia, maybe. That was a Flexera acquisition that we've been continuing to invest in. We assess more applications than any other product on the market. A lot of security scanners will tell you some vulnerable applications that it can detect on the endpoints, but the number is small compared to that of Software Vulnerability Manager because of its sole focus on just software vulnerability detection and remediation. Remediation, largest patch catalog on the market, all pulled together, really help you stay on top of things. And again, go talk to Yaron at the Flexera table to get more information. Endpoint management. So I've been in endpoint management space forever. I really like this topic, so squeezed it in here. Excuse to talk about it. Unified endpoint management is the term that you probably heard by now. It's been gaining popularity over a pretty long period of time, maybe 5-6 years. And it's all about treating computers more like mobile devices. So you provision the device, right, versus blast an image with all the apps on it. It's more of a self-service play, right? So the applications that you want, you pick and you get them, enterprise app store type thing. And then the evolution of UEM, I wanted to kind of highlight that we've seen the bigger players in this space make the same moves. So Intune used to be all about Windows phone devices. Then they started supporting Android and iOS, but it really was a mobile device management solution that had some limited and slowly increasing capabilities on the Windows side. AirWatch did the same thing. AirWatch was a mobile device management solution that has evolved into what they actually call Workspace ONE UEM, their unified endpoint management solution. And what's happening here, and the way that this is relevant, is the way you manage a mobile device is just next gen, right? And those mobile management APIs are making their way into the operating system, the Windows operating system, the Mac operating system, and not just their mobile device equivalents. This means that, and actually what we're seeing is on the Mac side, where they're much more aggressive about forcing out old technology, there could be a day around the corner where you can't install an agent that can do various things. You have to use the mobile management APIs to affect such things on endpoints. And so what that will mean is a level playing field for desktop management. It'll be more about the user experience, integration with other systems, brand, But the actual capabilities will kind of get reset when you say, well, the only management things you can do are the management things exposed through this API that is essentially open to anybody in the space. Of course, Microsoft rules these days, and we see Workspace ONE making some headway. Both Configuration Manager and Intune, mash them together, call them MEM, or however you want to look at it. Microsoft definitely owns this space, largely because of the approach they've taken from a licensing standpoint. Many of you probably use it because you think it's free, or if you're not fooled into thinking it's free, you at least accept that you're already paying for it as part of your enterprise license agreement. So that makes it very attractive, and it's been around a long time, so it's matured. But Tanium, BigFix, Avanti have all been, big players aggressively trying to chip away at that space. And then there's the mid-market players like Matrix 42, Case that I used to manage, and ManageEngine are all very similar sets of capabilities but less complex and detailed, so that they can appeal to smaller environments where you don't have a huge IT staff, but you have a small IT staff that does help desk, that does desktop management, that does application packaging and deployment, many hats type users for these mid-market products. They're going to be a little slower to move to the UEM thing, because UEM means a lot of rewrite, and they don't have as big an investment level as the Tanium and BigFixes of the world. And then finally, I thought it worth mentioning right here, the workspace management approach, to where the desktop, the workspace itself, is managed and applications are provided more as a service in whatever format they need to be, more self-service, more of that mobile device experience, but with a more unique, all-encompassing approach. And Liquid, REST-1, and Sense are all solutions I've looked at that are doing interesting things in this space, particularly Liquid. So check them out, they're here. And then finally, repackaging. Pros and cons of repackaging. To repackage or not to repackage is a session I've done a bunch of times, and I don't want to reiterate all of that, so I'll go through this a little quickly, but I think a fresh look at this age-old question. When there was no silent installation available, you'd repackage. A lot of companies would repackage for the sake of consistency, to handle conflict management, to be aware of the details, like what exactly is in every package in my environment. I know that because I've repackaged it all, and I've got lists of all the files and access to everything. And then, just as today, target format preference. So if you were a thin app shop or app v shop, or you wanted a specific deployment package format, you obviously had to repackage. But the reasons you'd repackage were much more about no silent installation support being available and consistency. These days, you may need to repackage once in a while because there's no silent support available, but usually there's some ability to install silently, even if there's no customization or control provided. The one that I still see coming up probably most frequently is complex customization needs. I want to install this application, but I want these defaults all set. I want the shortcuts here, here, and here, and I want it to look like this. And you can do that through a snapshot very simply, and then you have your resulting package. Whereas if you want to do that as part of your wrapper script, you'll have to figure out, well, what files do I need to change? What registry entries need to be adjusted? What files need to be moved around, deleted, edited, in order to get the customizations that I seek? And a hybrid approach, and I'm sure a lot of you have done this, but maybe somebody out there gets a light bulb. If you don't know what you need to script to get the customizations you want, you can repackage it, look at the changes in the package, and then get that into your script. So you do a snapshot, and then you make your changes, and you see, oh, because I did that, this XML file has these 8 new lines in it. So my script, I'll have it put those 8 new lines in it, and I can basically figure out what I need to do in my script by repackaging, but not choose to deploy that repackaged version of the application. So some reasons that you would not want to repackage: the Time to resolution, it can take longer to repackage and test your package than it would be to just take the vendor command line and do it that way. Sometimes, depending on, again, your customization needs. Vendor support is a reason that I used to hear cited quite a bit. If I run into a problem with this application, the vendor hears I repackaged it, they're not going to support me. Yeah, maybe. I mean, that does seem like a valid position for the vendor to take, but you should also assume that it's your package unless you're able to reproduce it. If you're able to reproduce it on a system where it was installed normally, then the fact that you repackaged it isn't having an impact, and your vendor that you're dealing with should accept that. So I really don't buy that as a limitation. Managing updates can be a problem. So you've got one version of the application you've repackaged, a new version comes out, you repackage that. If you're using Windows Installer, you either need to get all those package IDs matched up and component IDs so that it can do a proper update, or more likely, you rip the old one off, you install the new one, which is fine, but your deployment is going to be remove it, install it, versus install over the top, and that can have an impact on your customizations. You basically have to always have your customizations in your package versus just the first time you rolled it out. And then applying vendor updates is something I've seen come up more and more, where the promise of a patch catalog is now you've got the vendor set up, the silent command line, but that setup and download and that silent command line aren't going to help you if the version that you deployed has been repackaged, because it may well install right next to it. It's not going to know that you have installed and install over the old one, but some files might get stepped on, and when you end up with two versions and then you uninstall one, it removes half the files and not the other half. So if you are moving from repackaging to using a vendor setup for updates, you're going to have to abandon that repackaged version and do as clean an uninstall as you can, then install the vendor version the way you want it. Then you can use the vendor updates to install over the top in the future. But if you have repackaged it, you can't just apply the vendor update over the top. Wrapping. So lots of benefits around wrapping. I do a packaging roundtable session with Flexera as a free webinar every other month. And last month we had the guys from the PowerShell App Deploy Toolkit join us, and it was really good to hear from them the history, why they built it, and what all the benefits are. I was always aware of the branding, the user interactions where you can pop up and say, hey, I'm about to install this application, you need to shut down your machine, or do you want to delay for 5 minutes, or these types of things with your own colors and logo. That was really the consistent part that I saw as the biggest benefit in wrapping an application. But as many of you probably know, because you're actually using it to solve real-world problems, it can also provide you a bunch of functions and features to more easily do things in your script. It can simplify things. Standardizing is probably the most key. I mean, way back when I was packaging my very first applications 25 years ago, 30 years ago, I would put a batch file that just said install.bat, and then I'd put the command line in there, or maybe the command line and copying a file, but very simple. But the idea was, when I delivered a package to the team responsible for deployment, they consistently knew they just have to run the install.bat, and they don't have to worry about exactly what's in there. Simplifying, you get your customizations. There's a lot of benefits, and it doesn't have to be the PowerShell Deploy Toolkit. That's certainly the most popular, and it's the one that I recommend. But a lot of customers that we spoke to on the Admin Studio side of the house really pushed us to include the WiseScript editor in the suite, because they used to use it, they like it, they want to stick with it. AutoIt and simple batch files are also perfectly acceptable solutions. I think as the PowerShell App Deploy Toolkit gets more and more functionality, it becomes harder and harder to ignore for those people that are using the older technologies. But if you don't open your eyes and see what's going on over there, you could miss it. So please do read up on it if you haven't, and know what you're missing. So you're consciously missing out and not doing so just from a lack of understanding. So I mentioned the functions in the PowerShell App Deploy Toolkit. There's extensive logging in there, super important. You can mass remove applications with a partial match. So you could say remove Office or remove Browser, and it will uninstall everything with those matches in the name. It can see if there's a MSI installation already in progress instead of just failing. It can watch that mutex and wait for it to be available to trigger the next installation. It's a problem I think most of you probably run into. You can send a sequence of keys to an application window to try to automate a prompt. And there's a lot of SCCM specific capabilities in there as well. I'll talk more of those in a second. You can update group policies. You can manipulate the start menu or the taskbar and start menu shortcuts. And you can obviously manipulate file and registry functions. There's, I would have thought that manipulate file and registry information, I would just use the native commands, but they've actually written a bunch of functions that help you to do it easier, and you get the built-in logging and logic that goes around it to help you write a better script with less effort. So it really is a lot of power in that. And then, like I said, there are a lot of config-man specific things, like the ability to refresh the policy for the machine or the user, to do an inventory update or software update. It can handle exit codes. There's some that cause some trouble with the fast retry feature, and it's smart enough to get you the right exit code and handle them appropriately. You can prevent reboot codes from being passed back, which then all of a sudden configuration manager is rebooting the machine because it got a code back that told it it should. You can get in front of that. So there's a bunch of stuff in there that overcome limitations or provide more functionality to make your use of your script wrapper with configuration manager and Intune more valuable. That's wrapping, and then there's scripting, right? And what I'll say very simply is serious IT pros can script. So I hope if I were to ask, raise your hand if you can script, everybody would raise their hand, because we all have our own definition of script. Everybody can write a command line, right? But seriously, you really want to be able to address things not just in your packages and in your wrapper script, but there's been numerous times where I've been the hero at my organization because there was a need to do something that seemed really complicated or difficult to do because of the scale of it needing to be done on thousands of machines, and how are we going to go about this? And then as a scripter, you can see the solution a little easier, and then you can produce that solution and really impress the hell out of people. And like I said, I really do think that it is the type of thing that separates a junior IT pro from a senior IT pro or a serious IT pro. So the best thing for you to do to learn how to script isn't necessarily get a book on how to script. It's to have a problem to solve. So look for a problem to solve, and it might be the installation of an application or the customization of an application as part of your PowerShell App Deploy Toolkit wrapper. If that's a problem that you have to solve, then great, because that's what you need. Once you have a problem to solve, you can Google what you need to Google, you can ask the questions you need to ask, and you can fight your way through it, and then that skill goes in your toolbox. And then next time you run into a new problem, you attack that one and you figure that out, and that skill goes in your toolbox. And that's really how you go from someone who doesn't know anything to someone who knows a little bit to somebody who's very comfortable automating anything that they can think of. So don't get carried away trying to automate everything you can think of, but it's really amazing what can be done, the value that you can add to your organization by being a good scripter, and is immeasurable, and I think associated with the skills of packaging and application troubleshooting. It's a very natural thing for you to understand not just how to write a script, but what that script should do to really make the changes that you know need to be made. So thank you. This concludes my recorded portion of this session. I will be taking live questions, and like I said, I'll also be at the booth. You can catch me and some of my colleagues at the Packaging Roundtable every other month. Register at flexera.com. I'm also posting articles and videos in the Flexera community, not just about products, but about thought leadership type topics and things that touch on a lot of the things that I've covered today. And then if you just want to see what I'm up to in general, not just work stuff, but whatever I'm up to, I do have a blog called bkelly.com where I'll talk about NFTs and crypto and concerts and other things, not just packaging and vulnerability management. But that's pretty much what I'm doing with my time, and that'd be a good place to go follow it if you're interested. Thank you very much for attending, and I hope to talk to you in a moment.